What is up, everybody? Daniel here from the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. We are talking spring game offense today. What can we expect to see out of Georgia's offense on Saturday? Will Mike Bobo do Mike Bobo things, or will he do Todd Monken things? What do we get from the quarterbacks? What do we get from the wideouts? All of that and more today on the Locked On Bulldogs podcast.
You are Locked On Bulldogs, your daily podcast on the Georgia Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? I am Daniel, as I said. This is the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. Thank you so much for being with us today. Your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. All of your Georgia Bulldogs content is right here. Clint was on here yesterday. Yes, we were together for a week. We got some episodes recorded. Some episodes did not work out so great. But the beach was fantastic, and your boys needed a vacation. So Clint was on here yesterday. He talked about players to watch during the spring game, and he focused, as Clint often does, on the defensive side of the ball, which is great. But I'm here to talk about the offensive side of the ball. What should we be watching for on Saturday when Georgia takes the field, which, by the way, the Masters is now in the rearview mirror, and the UGA spring game has all of our attention. It is a fantastic time of year for sports. It's a great time to be a Georgia fan. The back-to-back national champions are going to take the field in Sanford Stadium. Many of you will be there on Saturday. Can't wait to hear about your experience. Thank you so much for taking this podcast with you. So let's get into it. And I'm going to go right off the bat. I'm going to go to the wide receiver position because I think this is not the biggest marquee position that everyone will be watching on Saturday. We're going to talk about the quarterbacks and in segment 2, but I do think the wide receiver position is the most important position that we're going to see on Saturday. Georgia has a lot of new faces at this position, and they have a lot of faces that are not new, but that haven't necessarily, I don't want to say lived up to expectations, because that's probably not a fair thing to say about people like Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint, or Arian Smith. We've certainly seen great things out of these guys, but we haven't necessarily seen enough things, I'll say, out of them. This year, Georgia is going to have some bodies, maybe many bodies, step up at the wide receiver position. We've already talked quite a bit this spring about how excited we are to see these two new transfers at the wide receiver spot, Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett. I cannot wait to see both of them and how they're utilized. I can't wait to see what kind of personnel groupings we see a little bit of. Now, obviously, the squad is split. And so you're going to have half the wideouts on one side and half the wideouts on the other side. And so you're not necessarily going to get a window into all the personnel groupings, but you are going to get to see how these guys are utilized. Who's in the slot for the most part? Who's playing the X? Who's playing the Y? Who's having success at each of those positions? Who seems to have some chemistry with the quarterbacks? Who's a deep threat? Who's a possession guy? Is there going to be a wideout like we've seen in years past who just straight takes over the spring game? Because we've seen that a few different times from Georgia wide receivers where one guy seems to be locked in with the quarterback and he takes over the spring game. And listen, that has often translated into a bit of during the season success. And so I think all of that makes me excited about the wide receiver spot. It makes me excited to see. Obviously, we've got some injuries at tight end. Sperlin is out. We know what we have in guys like Brock Bowers, Oscar Delp. And so I think I'm most excited to see the pass catchers at wide receiver on Saturday. Who's going to step up? Who is maybe going to seemingly separate themselves a little bit from the pack? Those will be some of the storylines that I'll be watching. And then I guess we have to talk about who it is that's going to be throwing them the ball. But before we do that, let's talk about our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel is the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. And I'm not sure if you know this, but baseball season is here, which means grand slams, no-hitters, double plays are back. And there's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, as we've said before, new customers to FanDuel can step up to the plate for a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. You see it right there on your screen if you're watching on YouTube. FanDuel.com/lockedon to place your first bet and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. Listen, you know that Clint and I are on the Braves. They had a bit of a skid at the end of last week, but the Padres are good teams. The Padres are a good team. They swept the Cardinals, another good team. Once the pitching staff gets healthy, once this lineup is at full strength, which, I mean, just so many injuries right now that the Braves have been dealing with. But once this lineup is at full strength, you have got to like the Braves as a division winner, as a World Series contender. All of these are great bets. You can build same-game parlays with your favorite matchups from the day. You can pick pitchers to go over or under on strikeout totals, hit totals, home run totals, all of that. So don't miss your chance at a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 when you go to FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, so let's talk about these quarterbacks. Now, it's just the spring game. I know that. And whatever happens with the quarterbacks on Saturday, let me just get ahead of it and say people will overreact to it. Whatever it is, it will elicit overreactions. And here's why. Because the spring game, as much as we love it, and as much as it's there's the pageantry of it, and there's the festivities, and there's the beautiful weather, hopefully, and a chance to get out with your kids and go to a football game. As much as we love it, the spring game for Kirby Smart, Mike Bobo, and Glenn Schumann and staff, the spring game is a practice. It is another practice. It is one of many practices that this staff will see these quarterbacks participate in. And so whatever we see on Saturday, Kirby will be very quick to want to come out and temper people's expectations and say, no, don't get ahead of yourself. Just because this guy did this and this guy did this, we watch a lot of football in practice and we don't want to. I know all that, okay? So I'm not going to get out here and say that the quarterback position is the position to watch, because if Carson Beck balls out, he's the guy. Or if Brock Vandegrift balls out, then he's the guy. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think that this matters, the quarterback position, for a couple reasons. Number one, we have a legitimate quarterback competition in Athens for the first time in a while. I'm going to take you even last year, Stetson Bennett was the guy. The year before that, JT Daniels was the guy. There was no quarterback competition. Stetson Bennett wasn't on anyone's radar. JT Daniels came in the final 4 games of the previous season, and he absolutely balled out, and everyone was excited and thrilled about JT Daniels moving into the 2021 season. And so there was no quarterback competition then. You haven't really had a quarterback competition since the Dwan Mathis era, not to harken back to a quarterback competition that did not go well at all, but that's really the last time that there was some real ambiguity about who the starter was going to be. Even when Justin Fields came in and there was all that controversy about quarterback, It was Jake Fromm's job. Jake Fromm had taken us to the national championship game. It was going to be Jake Fromm's job. Right now, we have two quarterbacks, and neither of them have done anything of note on a football field in a meaningful game since they were in high school. So it matters out there against a live defense in front of a big crowd. Kirby and Mike Bobo will be watching how these guys perform in this practice as opposed to all the other practices. The other reason that it matters is because Brock Vandagriff hasn't even, not only has he not done much in meaningful football games, Brock Vandagriff hasn't even done that much in spring football games up until this point. He's never even been high enough on the depth chart to get a ton of meaningful reps in the spring. Yes, you saw him last spring. Yes, we've seen him before. But this year is going to be a totally different feel looking at Brock Vandagriff on the football field. He is going to be leading one of the offenses. He's going to be the guy on that side of the ball. That is a role that we've never even... Carson Beck last year in the spring game was the guy opposite Stetson Bennett. We've seen him in that role, and he performed brilliantly in the spring game in that role. Let's see how he does this year, and let's see how Brock does in his first opportunity to get some rhythm, to get a lather going, to get a little bit of rep on rep on rep action. So I think that's a fascinating thing to watch. Are we going to know who the starting quarterback is after the spring game? No, of course we're not. That's a ridiculous thing to even want to know. Kirby and Mike Bobo are going to start who Kirby and Mike Bobo think gives them the best chance to win. And spoiler alert, they've done that the last 2 years, and it's worked out pretty well for them. So what we are going to see on Saturday is how these quarterbacks perform, where they are in their progression, and specifically in the case of Brock Vandagriff, does he give you the impression of a guy that can lead this offense to where we want to go? Because, quite frankly, I think we can all imagine Carson Beck being the starting quarterback at Georgia, right? We could kind of picture what that looks like. I'm not sure anyone could even imagine what it's like for Brock Vandagriff to be the starting quarterback at Georgia. We just haven't seen enough of the dude. Well, Saturday, that's going to change. And to be honest with you, that is the most exciting part of the spring game for me. I don't know if he's going to play good. I don't know if he's going to play bad. I'm not saying I want him to be the starting quarterback. I'm not saying he's one of my favorite players. I'm excited because a kid's going to get an opportunity to do something that we haven't seen him get an opportunity to do. And we're going to get to learn a lot as Georgia fans about what kind of a player we have. All right. There's one more thing on the offensive side of the ball that I think all Georgia fans will be paying attention to, will be overreacting to, and maybe should be paying attention to and reacting at least a little bit to on Saturday. And we'll talk about that when we come back. All right, we're back. The 199 is here. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. Loyal third segment listeners, bonfire.com/store/the199 is where you can go to get all the merch for the podcast. I waited till the third segment for this one because it's really I don't know how else to say it. On Saturday, we get to watch Mike Bobo call plays for the University of Georgia for the first time in a significant period of time. Now, all the caveats. It's the spring game. He won't be working with his full personnel because the personnel will be split in two. He won't be calling plays for everyone because I assume he'll only call plays for one unit. Maybe he won't even call plays for either unit. I don't know. He won't want to show too much of his hand. That'll be the narrative, blah, blah, blah. Let me say something about that. I don't think the coaches at Georgia give two craps about revealing their hand or letting people know what's in the playbook. Now, we're not going to see a bunch of power run, one, because we have like 1.5 healthy running backs, and two, because that's the way that people get hurt. You don't learn as much that way in the spring game. So it's not like the offense is going to be called exactly the way that's going to be called in games. But I don't think Mike Bobo cares too much about letting South Carolina know what types of plays are in the playbook. Here's what I think Georgia fans will all be watching for. You don't need me to tell you to watch for this. Here's what I think we'll be watching for. When Mike Bobo calls the plays at Georgia, does it feel like Mike Bobo's calling the plays at Georgia, and you all know what that feels like? Or does it feel like Todd Monken's still calling the plays at Georgia? There's been this kind of narrative going around, and I don't know if it's true or not, but the narrative is that Mike Bobo came in and he learned under Todd Monken, and Mike Bobo saw what worked under Todd Monken, and Kirby Smart said when Todd Monken left, he said, "Hey Mike, I want you to do that." And Mike Bobo said, "I can do that." And so he got the job, and he's basically just going to try to do his best Todd Monken impression. Now, that's an extreme version of the narrative because everyone knows that's not reality. Mike Bobo is going to put his stamp on this offense. He's not just going to try to replicate everything that Todd Monken did. But is Mike Bobo going to keep certain aspects of this offense, certain aspects of this play calling dynamic from Todd Monken, or is it going to feel like we're back in Aaron Murray type Mike Bobo UGA offenses? Now, we've made the case on this podcast, the Leatherman has made the case on this podcast, that Mike Bobo UGA offenses are very good. He did not have good defenses. I would argue he did not have nearly as competent of a head coach as he does now. Those teams didn't necessarily win a ton of games, but it wasn't Mike Bobo and the offense's fault. Now Mike Bobo's back. Is it going to feel like it's him, or is it going to feel like it's sort of a little bit of a hybrid between him and Todd Monken? Georgia fans, what do you even want it to feel like? That's the question. That's something to pay attention to. It is just the spring game. It's not a real game. I understand that. They're not going to be, it's not the full playbook. It's not the whatever. Yes. What's the feeling of the Georgia offense coming off of Saturday? Because to be honest with you, I think that will be the first thing that we end up talking about on this podcast when we come back. What did the offense feel like? Did it feel like Mike Bobo? Did it feel like Todd Monken? So that's what I'm going to be watching on Saturday. Let me know in the comments what you are planning to watch at this game, what you're keeping an eye on. If you missed yesterday's show, go back on audio, Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, download, leave a rating and review. Listen to Clint's takes on what to watch for on the defensive side of the ball. And subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, on audio platforms for Georgia Bulldogs content each and every day here on the Locked On Bulldogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We will see you guys tomorrow.